Hi, my name is Lori Shaw Grey Eyes, and I am a Métis Cree from Muskeg Cree Nation. And then this is a first recording for my podcast, which is called the Riel Cree Podcast. The reason it's called the Riel Cree is because I'm both Métis, which Louis Riel was Métis, and I'm also Cree. So on my grandmother's side, I'm a Lafont, which is Métis, and on the grandfather's side, my Muslim, I am Cree. So this podcast will have many different guests over the next few months and into 2026. They'll talk about the land, they'll talk about our music, they'll talk about our traditions, our history. So the people that attend the podcast, especially across the world, they'll know a little bit more about the Indigenous in Canada. The Indigenous make up three distinct groups. So it's the Inuit, which is northern Canada, the First Nation, which runs across the prairie provinces, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and also British Columbia and Alberta. So when we look at these provinces, also the First Nation are also on the east and west coast. So they go across Canada. And that's another group. And the last one is the Métis. So when we look at our Indigenous in Canada, they make up 1.8 million. So we're in a minority. We're only 5% of the total population, which is 300, just over 300.5 million in Canada. We're a very small group. So when we actually go through these different episodes, we will have some key topics. So we'll talk about the land, we'll talk about some traditions for healing, we'll have music, so we'll use songs as medicine in our specific episodes. I'll have different interviews. It could be some political people that'll actually be on the podcast. Some will be family members that'll talk about the history around Muskeg Cree Nation. Most recently, we performed my band, which is Gen 7. We performed at Batoche. So what is Batoche? It was the last stand of Louis Riel. He was a prominent figure in Canadian history, Métis from Manitoba, that stood up for the Indigenous. He stood up against Canada with the Cree and the Dakotas. So three tribal bands that were in Batoche. The late 1800s, 1885 was the rebellion, and they stood up for the Indigenous because our food, our bison and buffalo were being hunted, and their skins were being sold. That was really a critical means of food for our people. Our land was being sold to and being taken away for CP Rail. And a lot of our rights, which, with regards to the treaties, the first treaty was created in 1725, which really, when we look at the Indian Act and some of the treaties that were implemented, there were rules that we had to follow. And, at the Indigenous being the first people in Canada, it wasn't right. It wasn't right to be taking, our specific privileges away. We were the first people in Canada. So because of the uprising in 1885, in 1886, Canada created residential schools. And residential schools, it was mandatory. Your children were taken away on a bus. They came to our different communities. They were implemented from 1886 to 1998. And if you were a child that were First Nation and some Métis, it was mandatory that you had to go to these institutions. You were taught to read and write. They had different types of programs that were implemented. And from that, again, they weren't allowed to speak their language. They weren't allowed at all to have their traditions, their clothing, their food. They couldn't see their parents. They saw them for maybe a month in the summertime. And they stayed in these institutions from the time they were 6 years old until the time they were 16. That's your livelihood. That's when you learn your values. You're taught different things from your parents. So when they came out of school, they didn't have the skills to become parents. They didn't understand, their language was being taken away, and they weren't taught, they had to relearn the language. They had to relearn their traditions and write their language. And some people, some Indigenous, they never were taught. Like my mother never kept up the Cree language. She never kept up her writing. And she actually moved away from the reserves. I didn't grow up on reserve. I grew up in metropolitan city. I didn't learn my background until I was an adult. And that's not right. I should learn as a children. You look at the different communities and the different minorities in and across the world, and the different traditions, when you look at their language, the food, your music, you learn that as a child. And for it to be taken away, it's heartbreaking. And so my people are still recovering. They're still trying to heal for a next generation. They're still trying to keep their values, their music, their traditions whole. And we do that through learning who we are as the Indigenous in Canada and really the Indigenous in North America. So please join our specific podcast, learn about our roots of resilience, our legacy, our next generation to keep us whole again, and our different stories. So I welcome you to join the Riel Cree Podcast. I thank the Creator for blessings received, and I really look forward to welcoming you to our next podcast. Hi, hi. Thank you, Creator.